Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. John Raible, a very close friend of mine. As a matter of fact, we have traveled to various conferences at the national level and done some conferences at the local level. I came to UCF in 2013 to be exact, and I saw a man that was beyond his years in many things, and we'll discuss some of these issues today. But I want to say that John is my friend, and we've written together, we have shared so many things together, and we continue to learn from each other. So I want to start off by asking John an important question to get this interview going on. John, how did you become an instructional designer? What was your journey like?
So thank you, Rohan, for having me on Real Talk. My journey, I think, is rather unique. I started at the University of Central Florida as an undergraduate student, and my declared major was social science education. So I had my initial sights set on being a high school history teacher. And I ended up taking an online course, Technology for Educators.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a required course because I was an education major. And I was looking for work at the time. And one of the faculty member that taught the course was actually an instructional designer. It was known as Course Development and Web Services at UCF at the time, the predecessor to our current unit. And it just posted an announcement and said, hey, we're looking for some part-time workers to do some administrative tasks. So I was able to kind of get a job and see from a higher education perspective what an instructional designer does. So that kind of really sparked my interest. I worked there for several years as an undergraduate student. I went off and did my teaching internships. And I had a choice. I had a choice because I pretty much had a job offer from the school that I did my internships at, or I could go back to grad school and kind of pursue my master's in educational technology. So I decided I wasn't quite ready for the real world yet. So I went back to school. I was able to work as a graduate assistant in the department. And then I was able to get a full-time job as an instructional designer. So my entire professional career has been in higher education. Most of my career has been at UCF. I did have a brief employment opportunity at a local community college.
And you came back to UCF, right? You came back.
Yes.
You
Yes, I've
started
been
there, you came back, and you know we have a term in the department that we say you're a boomerang because you have
I am
returned.
a boomerang. Yes,
That's
I will say that. So I've been back for 9 years,
9 years.
and it's been a trip.
Yes, yes, because I've looked at your work once I arrived and I realized that you are the technical individual. You think from a high level when it comes on to technical issues. And sometimes in our conversation, you'll say to me, you're asking something for something that cannot be done. And I love that, keep that check and balance, right? But I realized that you have done so many projects since you arrived and returned again at UCF. I want you to give me a brief summary of some of the projects that you have found most rewarding at this point in time.
I've had the opportunity to work in a variety of disciplines, whether if it's in the legal studies department, communications, philosophy, English, writing and rhetoric. I've worked on some early projects in education during my first tenure at UCF. So I've had a tremendous opportunity to work on courses, and also to have a bigger impact working on, as you said, with a more technical background, to work on tools that integrate into the learning management system through the LTI standard, the Learning Tools Interoperability Standard. So I'm most proud of the tools that have been co-created with a lot of individuals. I hardly work by myself, as evident to your earlier comment. So it's a truly collaborative effort. So the You Do It tool, I think, is probably has the most name recognition around the country and also internationally. It's it's released under a license that allows others to install it freely. They can edit it. So it's really open and a tool that allows faculty and staff to really go through an online course or any course in the learning management system to check for accessibility issues, to really provide an easy way to fix some of the most common accessibility issues. Some of my other projects focused on accessibility in terms of whether if it's closed captioning, whether if it's document remediation, whether if it's making it easier for faculty to add extra time to quizzes or tests in the learning management system. So I think of myself as kind of a person who enables access to
I love
everyone.
that. I love that. You mentioned UDoIT. So you're saying that UDoIT can be implemented on any learning management system, or is it specific to one?
So it is specific to one. It is specific to Instructure Canvas,
Okay.
Instructure's Canvas platform. I know that there's been a lot of interest in terms of trying to adapt it to other platforms, such as Blackboard Learns or Bright Spaces platforms, but currently it's only for Canvas.
Yeah, I know that tool, and I think it's a wonderful way to really evaluate your course as it relates to accessibility. I realize that you save the best for last because, as a matter of fact, I know you have a passion for open education resources. I want you to tell the listeners what are open education resources, and then I want you to tell them about your project that you're currently working on. Don't give away too much that you don't want to, but give an overview of what you're working on at this point in time. Over to you.
Sure. So kind of the term open educational resources can be traced back to UNESCO. So in the early 2000s, around 2002, UNESCO had a conference because technology really started to change from a one-way, like I had to be specialized in terms of to create a website, kind of the web 1.0 of just putting information out there, to being much more starting the transition to the web 2.0, where the web was used for kind of two-way communication and content creation. So around that time too, the Creative Commons organization came about, and not only do we need a philosophy in terms of what is open, we also need mechanisms to ensure that that openness can kind of have some rules. Because openness isn't just anything. Openness, I think, is a philosophy. And at the UNESCO meeting, they came up with a definition of teaching, learning, and research materials in any medium, digital or otherwise, that reside in the public domain or have been released under an open license that permits no cost access, use, adaptation, and redistribution by others with no or limited restrictions. So that's kind of the official definition of OER, and it really sets that guiding principles where, if it's in the public domain, in the United States at least, there are no restrictions. You can do anything you want with it. So if you think about, we work in Orlando, and Walt Disney World is here. If you think about how Walt Disney got his start, he looked to public domain content to make the movies. So Snow White, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and even example now of Frozen. Frozen is based off of a novel that was in the public domain. So Disney has a history of using public domain content and then creating what we call derivative works from that. So not only you have OER from a philosophical standpoint, we talked about open licenses, and that's what the Creative Commons organization came in and created a set of licenses where copyright was, if I create something, I'm the copyright owner in the United States. And then, but instead of having to contact me to get permission to reuse it, I'm just going to give kind of blanket condition or blanket permission under a certain set of conditions. So that's kind of the philosophical point of OER, and then also kind of the implementation point. So
Clearly explained. And any project that you want to mention that you're working on that you can share publicly? Any little aspect of what you're doing at this point?
sure. So
We are.
yeah, sure. So I've been working on OER at UCF since about 2015, and some recent projects. There's been a real push to really share and kind of get our work kind of out there in the broader community. OER to this point has had a real trouble with discoverability. So if you type something into Google, you get 10 hits and pages and pages and pages of stuff. So and then, as we know, search engines don't collect everything. And then also you can pay to have your search engine to have your listing on the first 10 pages. It's called search engine optimization. So there's a business side to that. So, but in terms of discoverability, so we've got these pockets in terms of, okay, we've got repositories like the OER Commons, we've got individual institutional repositories. UCF has the STARS repository, for example. There's a collection of institutions in the Western United States that use something called Mountain Scholar. There's all of these pockets, and there's been recent projects, especially out of George Mason University with the OER Meta Finder. And then also SUNY has the Oasis platform to try to look at all of these pockets and almost try and build a search engine for OER. So right now we're sorry.
So for our listeners, you're saying, and sorry to cut you, what is a repository? Because they might not know. How do you define that?
So for example, that's a great question. A repository, if you think about, my background image is actually the reading room at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And the Library of Congress itself is a repository. If you think about a library, it is a repository, and it has more than books. It's got images, it's got video, it's got a whole bunch of different kind of stuff, and it's organized. That's I think the biggest thing versus like if your closet at home just has a whole bunch of stuff in it, you can't call your closet a repository. No. There has to be some sort of systematic process to really go through. And I know that the shoes are over here, that my dress clothes are over here. And then when I need to find something, or when someone else needs to find something in my closet, there's a structure, there's an organization. It's easy to tell that person how to get access to it. So I think that's kind of the key characteristics of a repository.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for the explanation. Now, I thought as you were talking, I had a thought, because I'm saying to myself, you could have decided to select an area of interest other than open education resources. Why are you so passionate about this area?
So my initial passion came about because at UCF, we really were trying to look at some alternative to commercial textbooks. It's been well documented from the 1970s to about the late 2010s that textbook costs have gone up astronomically, and especially in the 21st century with the rise of homework platforms, access codes, and that type of material. And my colleagues and I were searching for alternatives. So for instance, for a student that has to buy a $300 textbook with an access code, what are some cheaper alternatives? So that's what really started. And it's like, okay, we were kind of shut down from commercial alternatives because of some exclusivity with the bookstore and kind of the business side, I would say, of course materials. So What was left was kind of the open side of course materials, which at our institution at the time hadn't really been explored. So, because the course materials throughout higher education are used as a revenue model for institutions, and I understand that. So we took the philosophy of the bookstore, upcharges about 20 to 30%, depending on a whole variety of factors. So, they said that, you can't really change that. So it's like, okay, well, what if we change the input? So from a math perspective, if something is free, 30% of free is still free. So 30% of zero is still zero. So that was kind of the space that we had to operate in initially. Was, okay, well, let's just stick to the no cost materials that don't really have to flow through the bookstore. And at that time, that's when kind of the initial kind of open OER movements kind of got started in higher education in the United States.
Yeah, I see that you've worked extensively. I've seen you organizing the stuff, and you explain it to me. And I must say, I must commend you on your sustained effort to provide low cost material to students. The issue for me is having a low cost is also very proactive in having access, because many students are from lower socioeconomic background and they do have their issues as it relates to materials. I want to ask you, globally, do you think that there's enough effort being done to have individuals having access to open education resources?
I would say globally, yes. There's actually calls right now as of this interview for proposals for OER Global, the Open Access or OER Global conference. So there is a collective interest, I think, internationally for OER. Australia, for one example, has had a lot of OER initiatives for a long time. In the sheer fact that UNESCO, which is an international organization, pretty much came up with this definition, it just kind of shows that there is international interest. Now, copyright, intellectual property, kind of technology, these are all 21st century issues, as our experience has showed us that the technology far outpaces the laws and policies governing it. And as we've seen kind of now with the streaming platform wars, content is king right now. Mm-hmm. So having a platform that allows for the open sharing of educational materials is, I think, going to be one of the 21st century's greatest educational achievements.
Excellent response. I like that. No, the other day we had a conversation. I had a conversation with you the other day regarding the whole issue of OERs as it relates to extended reality. And I told you I wanted more content. I'm not happy with the OER sort of limitation as it relates to content for application and within the educational context. And you said to me a few things that got me thinking. You told me that we were not at that stage yet. You want to share with our listeners why you say we are not at that stage to create the content needed for extended reality? Because I think you came from a very different perspective than I had.
Right. So when we talk about extended reality, virtual reality, or augmented reality, basically all the realities except the ones we live in. When we talk about those types of realities, the platforms and the software are still emerging. I want to equate it kind of to the Web 1.0 stage, where it's like we're still consumers, and the creators of this content are still highly specialized. The cost for software for platforms, it's still, I don't think it's reached that 2.0 stage where you have a lot of individual content creation. you've seen that in kind of virtual worlds where Minecraft or um, Second Life's been around for almost 2 decades now. If you think about kind of Twitter, social media, Facebook, the technical barriers to to uploading a picture to Facebook, to uploading a video or setting your status or sending a tweet is very, very, very low. But for kind of the extended virtual realities, it's still very, very, very high. So I think in terms of the interface to technology, the software, we're not at that point yet where we see that 2.0 revolution kick in, where consumers can now be content creators.
Okay, solid. I had deep thought after you mentioned that, because I was saying to myself, you're expecting things that are not there yet, and thanks for pulling me back on that one.
You're a
I wanted to
futurist.
ask you another question, because I think you're at a space and a stage in your time that you're able to do a critique of open education resources. From your perspective, I would say, what would you change in relation to the current context that we are living in as it applies to OER for a better future for the deployment of open educational resources?
So we're in a very interesting time with OER right now. I think that awareness is at its highest point that it's been in higher education. Discoverability is improving weekly. Attitudes towards OER are increasing among faculty. The research shows all that. Now we're getting investment by the federal government for the United States federal government for the last couple of years in terms of grant projects, and we've seen a lot of states take the lead with California, Oregon, New York, Tennessee, Georgia, Virginia, Louisiana. We've seen kind of these statewide, it's spreading into the institutions, and not higher education institutions, but kind of our governmental institutions and that mindset. It's going to be an interesting 5 years to see how the commercial space reacts to the institutional investment into OER. And I think it's going to come down to a point where, if you look at it through kind of Rogers' diffusion of innovation theory, that we're still in the early stages of it. We're still in the kind of the quote, the bleeding edge of it, and we're starting to get into these early adopters where OER programs at institutions, at higher education institutions, or OER librarians or specialized instructional designers or other faculty champions of OER are really starting to have an impact. But we're still at that early adoption phase, because the type of investment needed, both from the faculty's philosophical standpoint and also from their time and energy, is still pretty substantial. And I think that's where discoverability, that's where kind of putting OER into easily editable formats, the reuse component of the 5 R's is really going to come into play as technologies such as Pressbooks, such as Google Docs allow for their easy reuse and editing of content. So there's a lot of different factors, from both just kind of the intrinsic good and the altruistic motives. We're kind of past that, where it's all altruism is I want to save my students money, but now it's I want to save my students money and something else, whether if it's whether if it's marketing. So my course enrollments are dropping, because my textbook is $200 to $300 and students just can't afford that, especially while we're still in difficult financial and real world times, or or there's mandates. There could be mandates from in the public sector of higher education that to bring costs down. So I would say the next 5 years is going to be real crucial in terms of how does it go beyond the early adoption to when we're into kind of that mainstream part of the bell curve.
Excellent, excellent response. I want us to take a step backwards and maybe go to a point where you're looking globally at this point in time. And I want to set the context for this question. You mentioned UNESCO and you state that UNESCO was very instrumental in setting this up. And I want us to kind of reflect on that because I think globally, I'm looking at open education resources providing an educational provision for many students who are not capable of accepting or accessing this sort of material. From your perspective, do you think as an industrial country, United States, do we have a responsibility to ensure that we create a framework that other countries can use and have access to? And at this point, I'm asking you, do you think we need to ensure that our policies are open for countries like Nigeria, the Caribbean countries to have access to the resources that we'll create and not have restrictions? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I just don't think it's a United States responsibility. I think it's a global responsibility to make sure that the framework is available to everyone. I'm going to use an example real quick. So for instance, a commercial publisher textbook, I can't digitize that, put that on a flash drive, or have a local, a Raspberry Pi computer that costs $30 that can be powered by multiple means and really deployed as an instrument of good throughout the entire world. I can't take that commercial content and put that on that device and send it, into the Caribbean, send it into other countries, because I'll get sued. I can't do that. But if you take the OpenStax version of that book, run out of Rice University, all their content, it has the Creative Commons attribution license on it. I can do that. So I think by continuing to promote both financially, philosophically, and kind of, putting that altruism aspect into it, I think, yes, the United States can take a lead in that. But I would say that I've seen projects out of the University of British Columbia in Canada. I've seen projects out of Australia. I've seen projects from the Open University in the UK in terms of making their content out there and accessible. So I think that's the first part, is finding it, putting it out there. But then kind of the second leg of it is to have organizations have the capacity to take these this content and package it in a different format or a different means that can be accessible to someone without reliable internet service or cellular service or devices, or how can we prepackage this content in other means that can get to a place that perhaps only has electricity every other day, for example.
Yes, yeah.
So it's
Powerful points. I like that you've touched on the issue of accessibility, because I think that is so important, especially within the context of COVID. And prior to COVID, we had not thought about so many of these things, but now we're having to give thought to them. And post-COVID is going to also lead to greater movement in OERs. That's what I'm suspecting at this point in time, because we need that globally. I would say at this point in time, solid points you've made. If you were to really reflect, what aspect of OER would you think about before you go to bed at night that bothers you or makes you feel good?
So the research that my colleagues and I have done at UCF, and we asked students, if you didn't have to spend money on textbooks, what would you take that money and use it for? And always the answers are food and housing. So we're looking at, if you wanted to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those are pretty important on the hierarchy. So we're taking something that is a barrier. Let me just say that is a barrier. We're removing that barrier and the resources are reallocated to something you need for survival. So I think having that sort of impact, that makes me feel real good. And having the impact and then having quality. In our conversation, we haven't talked about quality yet. And the research has shown that quality is on par for the most part with commercial textbooks. There's still pockets in very specialized disciplines that commercial publishers have invested a lot of money in, or they're on their 15th edition. But both students and faculty perceive the quality of OER to be on par with their commercial counterparts. So I think not only the removing barriers, but replacing the content that they would have spent $200 to $300 on with something that's still the same quality is another really good feeling.
Yes, I'm happy to touch that. And I want to leave it up to you. Do you have any final points that you'd like to mention at this point?
So I'll leave you with this. I think there's a saying that no one has to do everything, but everybody has to do something. So I think this is one of the opportunities where if everyone does something, then we're going to be so much better off for it. So you don't have to necessarily create an open textbook. You don't have to modify an open textbook. There's plenty of opportunities to get involved with OER. There's opportunities to just review. If you're a subject matter expert in a very specific field, then use your expertise and review something. So there's a whole spectrum of opportunities. So don't feel that you have to write your own textbook and make it an OER. Don't feel that you have to change the world in one sitting, but you have to do something.
My final question to you, do you have any resources that individuals could use and share as it relates to open access resources across the globe? Anyone across the globe could have access to these resources.
Absolutely, and they're available in the description of this video.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. John Raible, my friend, it has been indeed a pleasure for me to talk to you about OER. As a matter of fact, your passion for this area has been noted, and I'm sure the listeners will understand that you do have a passion for this area. You brought me on a trip because you told me where you started 2015. I'm looking at 2021. I've seen where you have produced so much as it relates to open educational resources. Not only that, but today you have displayed to me that you have a passion also for the area that I love, social justice. And at some point, I realized that you have contributed to the enhancement of individuals across UCF and maybe globally. I want to say well done on your colleagues for working on this area. And please, please continue to press on, because I think you have so much to offer in the field, and I think you have so much to give. And I would say to you again, thanks for attending and sharing your knowledge with the group. Over to you.
Thank you, Rohan. I appreciate it.
No worries.